There we go. Okay, so today what I want to do is talk to you guys a little bit about a very, very exciting topic, APA format, and how to do in-text citations. So here is Blizzard. Blizzard is going to help, I think, because she is an expert on APA format. Correct, Blizzard? Say hi to everybody. Yes, I am an expert on how to do APA format. So she's going to be monitoring me and making sure that I'm telling you the right things. All right, this is an important skill. It is, again, not the most exciting subject that we're going to talk about, but this has to do with your paper that you will be writing, and I'm hoping that if you're watching this, you have read the instructions for the paper, where I call it subject paper, research paper, whatever you want to call it. Notice it is a very short paper for an intro class. It's only 2 pages. To 3 pages, but what I want you to do is understand, a couple of the reasons I'm doing this is to not only get you to understand a little bit more about mental illness and how it works in real people, but to get some practice in writing a college paper, and especially on how to use APA format to cite your sources. All right, now, a couple of things that I want to mention with this. Well, first of all, if again, you read the information about the paper, all right, what you're basically doing here is coming up with a famous person who has been either diagnosed, or at least it's commonly accepted, has some form of a mental health problem. All right, when we're talking about a mental health problem, that can be anything in your book that's listed as a disorder, which are most of the more major ones, things like major depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, things like that. But you can also use eating disorders, which are in a different area in your book. You can use things like postpartum depression. You may use addiction, substance abuse. You can use developmental disabilities, things like ADHD. So there's a wide variety of things that you can choose from. Really, we're talking about anything that's listed in the DSM, which we will get to, but that's the big manual psychologists use. So you have a pretty wide latitude there in terms of what disorders you're using. A couple of things. First of all, your individual you choose has got to be a public figure, meaning that it just can't be someone you know, a family member, unless they are a public figure. But it needs to be somebody that you can find information publicly on. All right, so we're not going to deal with confidentiality things by doing a paper on a private citizen. All right, the person can be alive or dead. They need to be a real person. They can't be a fictional character. Sometimes it's tough. I mean, we're not to get too deep into some of the ideas that we'll get to when we talk about mental illness, but psychology is a relatively new discipline. So if you do an individual who was around a long time ago, let's say, for example, Abraham Lincoln, who's a really good subject, by the way. In Abraham Lincoln's time, there was no disorder with the term depression. But today, people studying Lincoln pretty much assume that that's what he had. All right, so you may find little discrepancies like that. Sometimes you'll have a person who maybe didn't go for help, especially, again, if they lived a long time ago. But today, people, again, pretty much assume that they had things. So you want to find some kind of a source, an expert that said the person had those disorders. All right, so it just can't be your opinion. All right, it has to be something you can find in a source. For this project, you may use online sources. All right, be careful when you do that. I think the best source is something that is a biography, a book or an online book, an ebook, or a site, but make sure, do your best to think and look for something legitimate. Be careful, especially if you're doing a pop culture figure, be careful that you don't just find a fan site, because anybody could make one of those. You don't know if that material in that is valid, so be careful with what you're choosing. All right, on the first part of your paper, you'll talk about your person, talk about the disorder. A lot of times on more than one. That's something called comorbidity. All right, they have more than one issue. Talk about that. You want to focus on a very brief biography, but again, you're focusing on their disorder. I don't need, if it's an actor, for example, a whole list of every movie they've been in. I want you to focus on facts about them and about their life and their past that has to do with the disorder, or at least could. Like, for example, if they've been through something traumatic. All right, talk about the disorder. What symptoms? Did they get treatment? How did their life go? All right. In the second part, I want you to go into a little more detail about the disorder itself. So here again, you're going to need to look up sources and get information. Go farther than your book. regardless of what, if the person has more than one disorder, you can choose one to focus on. So you want to talk in more detail about bipolar or about whatever. All right. The last part is more of an opinion. I want you to think about your person, think about why they're famous, think about their issues, and I want you to consider, do you think they would have been as famous, successful without the disorder? Now, sometimes, for example, you could, if your topic is a serial killer who had some kind of a disorder that caused them to become a criminal, obviously it was a bad thing. All right. But a lot of times there's two sides. You can look at things different ways. If you think about a artist, a musician, for example, someone like Kurt Cobain, or a writer, someone like a poet like Sylvia Plath or Ernest Hemingway, would they have been able to produce the works they did if they had been completely mentally fine? If you look at someone like Edgar Allan Poe or an artist like Vincent van Gogh, would they have been able to express what they did in those works of art if they had not had the mental illness? And so this is your opinion. So in this last part of the paper, now we're getting to the APA fun part. That last part, you don't need to cite anything. It's your opinion. Unless you have a fact in there, you really don't need to make any citations. But in the first two parts, when you're talking about your person and you're talking about the disorder, you're getting information from sources. Okay, and here is where you will need to know how to cite it. All right. The biggest mistake that students make when they're first learning how to cite things is they are under the impression that they have to only cite and reference when they are taking something word for word. Okay, that's not correct. First of all, you really shouldn't be taking things word for word. All right, you do not want to go into a website on depression, look at their description, and then cut and paste it into your paper and act like you wrote that. That is plagiarism, outright plagiarism. That is cheating. And that type of a thing can actually get you thrown out of school. At the worst case, you probably will fail the project at least. Don't do that. All right, you are pretty much always supposed to be rephrasing and rewording. You are getting information from various sources and then rewriting it, synthesizing it, putting it into your own words. Okay? The only exception to that really is if, like, for example, in this paper, you wanted to use a quote from your famous person. If I wanted to quote Edgar Allan Poe, I'm not going to rewrite Edgar Allan Poe and put it in my words. I'm going to use a quote from him. And once in a while, you might find something where there's very specialized language and it almost needs to be taken that way. All right, so once in a while you might do that. In those cases, it is very important that you make it clear that it is not your words. You put that in quotations and you put the citation there. All right. But even when you are rewriting in your words, rephrasing information, all right, you still have to cite the info. When you are citing in text, which is what we're doing here, what we're talking about, you are not citing the words, you are citing the information. Anything that did not come out of your brain, that is not your idea, has to have a citation. You have to be able to say that information in that little bit I just wrote came from this source. Okay? And that's a part that I think trips students up. They think, well, if I'm writing it in my words, I don't have to cite it. Yes, you do, if all of that was a fact or factual stuff that you took from some source. Now, a couple other things that you're going to come up against here. First of all, again, we're talking about facts. Now, if you do a person for this, or anytime you write a paper, let's say you're writing a paper on a topic that you already know something about. So maybe you don't have to look up facts. Maybe you already know stuff. But that information is still factual information. You learned it somewhere, somehow, okay? It isn't your idea. So for the sake of a paper, you need to find a source to back it up and to credit where it's coming from, even though it might be something that you already sort of know. Let's say I'm doing my paper on a famous person like Demi Lovato, and I already know a lot about her, but I still need to cite any facts. And pretty much everything in the first two parts of this paper is a fact. It's info. It's not your idea, even if you're writing it your way. All right. So in the social sciences, which is what actually all the sciences, social sciences, physical, the natural sciences, we use something called APA format. Now, if you're taking English Comp, you probably have learned something called MLA format. MLA is used in the humanities, primarily things like English and Lit and history are going to use that. But if you're talking about any science, whether that's biology, chemistry, sociology, political science, psychology, we use something called APA format. Now, a little bit of a warning. I've had students not sure how to do some of this, and they really good idea. They'll Google it. Okay, how do I do this? They want to know more about it, which is awesome. But be careful. Keep in mind, APA format is a huge format in how to write all sorts of things. All right, it is primarily designed for how to write scientific papers, and a lot of those are actual research studies. So if you Google it, you're going to come up with a lot of things that you don't need for this, like things like how to write an abstract, how to write your statistics, how to put tables, and you don't need all of that. Okay, so there's a lot of rules and a lot of things that APA covers that for this paper you don't really need. Maybe somewhere down the road you will. If you go into the sciences, you will. All right, but for this paper you don't. But what I'm looking for is what we call, again, in-text citations. If I'm writing a paper about a topic and I got that information from a source, I have to give a credit to it. All right, so that's what we're talking about here. All right. So how do I do that? It actually is very simple, especially if your sources. Now, it gets a little more complicated when you start to get in bizarre kinds of sources. But let's say for the sake of argument, for this project, you're going to use a book, okay? Which I would almost recommend because they're nice. And even if you don't have time to read the whole thing, you can look at it. But biographies are a really good source for this. All right. So, for example, let's just say I'm doing my paper on Brooke Shields. Brooke Shields is an actress, if you don't know who she is, who struggled with postpartum depression. All right, so I am writing my paper, and again, in this first part, I'm using my words, but I'm getting information from her book. All right, so I'm writing here, Brooke Shields suffered from postpartum depression, and I talk about her symptoms and all of that. Okay. At the end of that sentence or sentences, if they all that have information from the same source, it's all in my words, but it came from her book. At the end of that section, or end of those sentences, in parentheses, I write her last name, the author's last name, and the year the book was published. That's it. All right. So it's actually really, really simple in that respect. The other type of a source that you probably would have for this might be an article that's on a website. So, for example, if you use a medical website like Mayo Clinic, maybe the article you're getting information from, that page is labeled, maybe it's labeled major depression or bipolar disorder. So at the end of sentences that got information, with information from there, you might write in quotations the title of that page. So you might write bipolar, and again, the year that it was written, or if it doesn't have that, you can write the year that you retrieved it, which is this year. Sometimes there's no date. You can say ND, which means no date, all right? If there's no title like this, I'm okay with you for this paper, although technically this isn't what you do, but you can put the name of the website. You could say Mayo Clinic and when you got it. All right. If you have an article, let's say I found a magazine article that talked about Brooke Shields' depression. So again, same thing. At the end of that information, that section, I might write the name of the author of the article, and then again the year that it was written or published. Okay, you can't see that, so there you go. All right. You need to do this after every section or every sentence. So it depends. Let's say I have 2 sentences that are from her book. At the end of those sentences, I do that. Now, in the same paragraph, I go on, and this information comes from here. Let's say the next 2 sentences come back to this. I write that again. If the entire paragraph comes from the same source, you can cite it once at the end of that paragraph. All right, but if you've changed sources in there, you have to cite every time. Basically, what this is almost like a roadmap. So somebody reading your paper could say, oh, shit, so that means all of the stuff ahead of that came from that source if I wanted to go back and look for it. All right, so this is what you need to do. So here's the rule of thumb. When in doubt, when you're writing a paper, if you're writing something and you're putting something, you're talking about some facts and information in your paper, if you are not sure if it needs to be cited, cite it. It's always better to cite when you don't need to than do the reverse, because this is the thing. This is considered plagiarism too, if you do not cite information. If you have information in a paper and you do not have an in-text citation, you are basically saying to the reader that that information was my idea. Now, clearly, it is not my idea that Brooke Shields had a baby and developed symptoms of depression afterwards. That's not my idea. That's information that came from someplace. So if I don't cite that, though, it's considered stealing. It's cheating. All right, and it is another form of plagiarism that schools are very much cracking down on. So I always feel like, if, again, think of it this way, you are citing the information. If the information that you're writing about came from something, is not your idea, cite it. If you're not sure, cite it anyway. Cite it. Find a source, cite it. It's better that way. You can't be accused of cheating that way. Even if the teacher says, well, you didn't really have to cite it, that's a much minor transgression. All right. Now, in the end, when you're talking about your opinion, if I say, I really think that Brooke Shields was able to pull herself up from this because of XYZ, and I want to come up with my own ideas, that's different. That's my opinion. I don't have to cite that. All right. But if I put a fact in there, let's say I say later on, well, it turns out that Brooke Shields went to therapy at this place in California, and I named the place. So that's a fact. I would need to cite that. All right, but again, if it's just my idea and I say, I believe that Kurt Cobain's depression came out in his lyrics, that's my idea. Right? Now, if I quote his lyrics, I have to cite it. Okay. At the end of the paper, then, you have to make a more detailed, what's called works cited page. And some people, what you might have in the past or whatever, some bibliography. And here's where you need to write more than just author and the name in the year. Here is where you would write for a book. You would write the author's name. You would write the name of the book, where it's published. And I gave you examples on the paper, so I'm not going to write them all down again. But you would write down for an article the name of the author, the name of the article, the name of the actual magazine or journal, the years. So you would have a lot more detail in that. And you would write them and put them alphabetically. If it doesn't have an author, like this, the website, you would go by the first letter of the article term. All right, and again, there's so many different types of things you might be citing. There's websites, sometimes people will use videos. So the best way, if you're, I gave you examples on that paper of the most common things, like a book or a magazine article. If you're not sure, or if it's something different, again, the best way to do it is to Google it. There are also programs that will automatically do this and put these in APA format for you. I don't know how useful they are when you only have 2 or 3 references, which is all you need for my project. I think it's probably very, very helpful when you're writing a paper that's got dozens of references, but that's fine. But just again, be careful if you Google how to do something in APA format. Again, for this paper, you do not have to worry or be concerned about any of the things with all those extra stuff that it will tell you about, because APA format is, if you buy the book on APA, I mean, it's a guidebook. It's pages and pages of all different types of things. But for this paper, I'm just talking about what we call, again, in-text citations in the body of your paper that you are citing where you got information, and secondly, that you write the works cited page at the end. All right, again, for this paper, it is relatively short. I'm only asking you to get 3 references, so it shouldn't be a big deal. I know we don't have a ton of time, but I think, this is fine. The only other thing I would say, and again, I'm not going to be overly picky. I know for most of you, this may be a lot of you, this may be the first time you're ever using this or getting in this habit of doing it, which is why I'm assigning this. I'm not going to be really picky with little things like, oh my gosh, they put the period in the wrong. I'm going to, try your best, and that's fine. But what I'm really looking for, the main thing I'm looking for, is an honest to goodness effort to cite. What I don't want to see is a paper with nothing cited. And again, I know that this is new and I may or may not fail. I probably, won't necessarily fail you. I might give you the benefit of the doubt, but I'm telling you to please cite. It is no fun. That's why it isn't, but it is what it is. And this is just a necessary thing that you kind of have to learn and get in the habit of. Um, when I say 2 pages for this, which is the minimum, and again, I mean 2 full pages. So again, you're talking about normal fonts, all right, Times New Roman, whatever, 12 font, all right, with a reasonable margin, all right. So please don't, please don't do this. Here's a paper with, and then write, start down here with a huge margin, and then do that on this, and then say that's 2 pages. No, 2 full pages, all right? It should be easy as whatever to do that. All right, any questions with this, please let me know. Hopefully this helps a little bit for you. You know, again, don't be afraid to look at the notes I gave you, double check, Google it, whatever. Do what you need to do. And if I can't help you, Blizzard can. Blizzard is now so bored that she's now napping in the side over there. And I don't blame her, to be honest with you. So anyway, have a good evening. Thank you.